All right. So we're taking a look at the current state of the atheist-Christian debate with one I think is pretty typical, but has some nice elements for critique, mainly because the skeptic here, Stephen Woodford, is very open and willing to engage, even offering a direct comparison with his beliefs, which we'll look at later. And the apologist here, Jonathan Pageau, leaves the door open for those direct comparisons by claiming he doesn't think direct comparison can be done. In part 1, we saw it can be done by taking one of Stephen's questions. And just to recap, Stephen is asking if we can mine the Bible for its wisdom. So can we extract the elements that have helped humanity learn and grow, while at the same time filtering out any garbage that would prevent societies from reaching its full potential? I think it's a fair question, and right now religion is finding all sorts of new defenders for questions like these, like author and scholar Thomas Holland, who are coming to the conclusion that getting rid of this is at the heart of our modern world's increasing chaos and collapse. But let's be clear. Thomas Holland believes that Christianity and the Christian Bible evolved, like what Stephen wants. In other words, it was formed by people distilling ideas that made sense and gave them cultural stability, and that this consolidation of ideas and stories happened through some sort of organic process of cause and effect. Of course, that's not what the Hebrews claimed. To quote my favorite fiction author, they claimed it was a divine invasion, not organic at all. Nothing to do with natural rules of cause and effect. They claimed it was given miraculously. Jonathan, for his part, says that he accepts this faith-based statement, that it is a miraculous revelation, not just a handful of good ideas that people came up with over the centuries, like Thomas and Stephen want to believe. I want this to be clear because even though these are very smart people, probably all with way more formal education than I have, all these questions break down into very simple arguments. And so, last time we took one question: what about God ordering genocide of two people groups in the Old Testament? In other words, can't we all just get along? And to this we saw a simple answer. No. By their very nature, societies based on intrinsic human value always come into conflict with primitive societies that lack that foundation. It's happened every time in recorded human history. The real answer to Stephen's question is that one of two things will happen when these societies interact. One, the society founded on intrinsic value will regress. They'll acculturate to the surrounding societies, which is why the Hebrews were commanded to drive the Canaanites out in the book of Numbers. The only other possibility is that the culture based on intrinsic value will contact and persuade the primitive society, and so reshape its way of thinking. And we can't say that now that we know that, we're adding and so evolving the biblical view here, because that was the biblical view. The need to spread the message and so bring those other societies into a state where they accepted the notion of intrinsic value was already at the heart of biblical Hebrew teaching. We've come to think of it as something violent and greedy, because at times it certainly was. But there's all sorts of examples, largely from the age of missionary movements in the 1800s, that weren't violent, and that led to primitive people groups changing their worldviews into something compatible with modern complex societies, and so not sharply conflicting and being destroyed like our examples from the last video. So let's build on this idea with another series of questions, and here I'll just show one clip.
And just to say, well, like it depends on the way in which you read it. So you could read it where it says, and you've spoken about this before, do not mix linen and wool.
But Stephen gave examples throughout of statutes of the Mosaic Law that seem, shall we say, dated. After all, they were given to a Bronze Age ancient society. So obviously things like executing someone for picking up sticks on Saturday, or, just like he said, a prohibition against wearing clothes made out of two different types of fabric, make no sense now, right? Can't we at least evolve those? And this is where we need to make something clear. Now, just like the first video, the answer is simple, but it requires a bit of context. And when we're done, the answer will have two simple parts to it. You see, the Mosaic Law already has evolved. It was supposed to evolve. And it said very clearly what was required for that evolution to take place. So first, we have to understand that. Then, we can look at the rules and regulations, and once we're clear on what was meant to change, we'll be able to see what was meant to stay the same, and see whether or not Stephen or anybody else has a better set of ideas. Again, we'll be able to hold them up to direct comparison. So let's get started. The Mosaic Law was 612 rules and regulations that governed every part of Hebrew life: their clothes, how they wore their hair, the way they farmed, what they could eat, the way they treated illnesses, their holiday celebrations, on and on. Doing all of this stuff made you Israel. You see, the name comes from a story of one of the Hebrew forefathers wrestling with a human apparition of the divine God. The story says that Jacob wouldn't let go until God blessed him. So our divine figure tells him, "You have a new name now, Israel," which we translate as the one who wrestles with God. But that's a bad translation. If you wrestle with someone for a blessing, for some benefit, we call that sparring, or rolling for you jiu-jitsu types. In other words, training. And it's clear that the idea here is the one who trains with God. But training for what? And to that we get this answer: training to become a kingdom of priests. Now, here's where we get the evolution. You see that it didn't start out as a kingdom of priests. That takes training, remember? And so the Mosaic Law set them up with a temporary sort of stopgap government. It set them up as a theocracy. Now, a theocracy is not a kingdom of priests. It's a kingdom led by a priest or a group of priests. And as we see in the Old Testament with the sons of Eli and the sons of Samuel, that can get really messy since priests don't just have earthly authority like medieval kings, they had moral authority too. And so they had very little accountability. Accuse the king of moral wrong, and they had to appeal to the religious class to back them up, which is why they were so keen to keep good relations. But accuse the high priest of a moral wrong, and he could just come back and say, "Well, maybe you're right. Here, I'll ask." Nope. God said, "I'm right, you're wrong." Oh, and he says you have to be executed right now. Now, if everyone in the nation had training enough to understand and engage in the running of their own nation, we would call that a democracy. And there you have it. The foundation for all modern governments enshrined in one of the earliest alphabetical systems, long before the Greeks started experimenting with it. At this point, you probably know where this is going. That evolution, that transition from a nation under priests to a nation of priests, was supposed to take place after the Hamashiach, the Messiah, came and ushered in this new age. And of course, Christians believe that Jesus was this Messiah. Jesus, who taught that the kingdom of heaven, as he called it, was like a mustard seed, like sheep being found, like a pearl of great price. That kingdom of heaven was the kingdom made up of priests. Now, his explanation of this threw some people, which ultimately led to his execution, because he taught that kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, wasn't like an earthly kingdom at all, with borders and officials and all the rest. No, it was a kingdom of like-minded believers. And so it didn't need to throw off Roman rule. And so the crowd, many of whom really wanted to throw off Roman rule, were easily turned against him. But how is this consistent with Hebrew teaching of the law? Really, how could anything change the law if it was given by a perfect, all-powerful God? Jesus explained this by saying he wasn't abolishing the law, he was fulfilling it. Okay, but fulfilling it how? The New Testament author Paul explains this in much greater detail in the book of Romans. Too much, apparently, since judging by all these answers to Dennis Prager explaining why an eye for an eye was such an important statement in the ancient world, it was, by the way. Clearly, many Christians don't understand what Jesus, or Dennis for that matter, was saying. But like I said, the answer is really simple. At least it is now in modern times, because we have the perfect analogy. You see, they didn't have police officers back then, so Paul had to jump through hoops. So, what's the answer? Exactly how was the law supposed to change? Think of the Mosaic Law like the traffic laws in any city. You see a speed limit sign that says 55 miles per hour. Okay, what happens if you go faster than that? Well, you could get stopped and cited. You might have to pay the penalty. You know who wouldn't have to pay the penalty? That police officer. Even though he had to drive even faster than the violator to catch up and pull them over. Doesn't matter. They're exempt. Now, they can't drive according to their own whims, get a bazillion driving complaints, cause a really bad wreck. They could lose their jobs, which is a lot worse than a traffic ticket. But here you see the priest-non-priest divide. The plain old commuters are just using the street laws given to them to predict the behavior of other motorists and to get where they're going. But the officers took an oath, and when they did, they became agents of that law. So imagine that everyone in a city took that same oath, and you get a kingdom or city of priests. Just as Jesus said, the laws haven't been abolished, they're still there, just like all the traffic signs staying in place. But Christianity teaches that everyone is now invited to take a sort of oath of office and become agents, so become operators of the divine law. And part of that is that you never get cited for breaking the law. I can pick up sticks any day I want. I'm never going to get stoned to death. Now, I can still get punished by my heavenly supervisor. It's happened before, it'll happen again, but not according to the law. The rules are still there, but now they're more like guideposts. The specific immediate punishments are gone. And that's part one of our two-part answer. Of course, we still haven't actually answered Stephen's question. Can we improve upon this law? Okay, so they're guideposts, but couldn't we make a better set of guideposts? And to that, I give another simple answer. No, I don't think we can. We can only try to personalize it, and even that's a really dicey proposition. Think about it. Like we saw in the last video, nearly every ancient people group has fundamentally changed from ancient times. The few who haven't all live apart from modern societies, with one exception. Those people were already primed for the modern age by a legal code that defined them, that quite literally trained them for the modern world. And that's not even the best comparison. No, the best comparison to show what I'm talking about is between Orthodox Jews and Orthodox Christians. Okay, Orthodox Jews, basically the same society for the last 2,500 years, since they came back from exile under the Persian King Cyrus, easily the most stable society on planet Earth. Christianity has gone from this to this in the last 2 centuries. As I mentioned before, the churches of Revelation chapter 1 and 2 trace a path of cultural compromise all the way down to the lukewarm stage, the cultural Christian stage. And very, very quickly, why haven't Orthodox Jews become lukewarm? Why aren't they wearing attention-getting look-at-me clothing to synagogue or saying whatever Oprah wants to hear while they give advice to Justin Bieber? Why isn't there a progressive Orthodox Judaism? It was hard for the Apostle Paul to explain it at 55 AD. It's easy now. It's because of psychological priming. I know this sounds strange, but hear me out. It turns out that we mere mortals are easily influenced. Play soothing music in the background, everybody looks nice. Play gangster rap, not so much. Go back to the Bronze Age, and you find that one group of people had a legal code, 612 rules, that primed their thinking to see the world as the product of a monotheistic, all-powerful God. 612 ways to avoid compromise. Why not eat pork or shellfish? Because both of those things had ancient connotations of something dirty, something filthy. And we humans are the type of creatures who extrapolate from things like thinking, well, if I'm someone who can consume filthy food, then I'm someone who can consume moral temptations too. Why couldn't they eat meat with the blood in it or be intimate during their wife's monthly period? Because blood contact was thought of as a thing that savages do, and they weren't supposed to act like that anymore. Why couldn't they have 2 types of material in their clothes or 2 types of crops in the same field? It was an image of compromise. Why couldn't they have black mold in their houses? Too much like a physical manifestation of sin in their lives. 612 rules, all set up like a smartwatch. It gives you constant reminders, but not of how active you are, instead reminding you that you live in a world made by a divine being that has a purpose and plan for your life. And don't get me wrong, I don't follow the Mosaic Law. Why would I? I don't associate pork or shrimp with filth. I'm too disconnected from food production for that. I just associate them with deliciousness. Oh, do I ever. And besides, a big part of that stability that Orthodox Jews had was based on the fact that they don't evangelize. They don't have to reach people. But I'm also well aware that those laws created a society so stable that almost 2,000 years after Rome broke them up for good, or so they thought, after pogroms and persecutions and the stinking Holocaust, That ancient nation actually reformed. So tell me again, how does this look anything at all like an organic process? This is David Reichert from The Bunker. Click like and subscribe and click the notification bell, and we'll try and keep the videos coming. Also, see the link below to order Book 1 of the Holocaust Engine series, our pandemic post-apocalyptic horror that won the Pinnacle Award for the best science fiction novel of 2020.